was all about, it all went back to education and grades, and it went back to him growing up in the streets of Brooklyn in Bed-Stuy, and knowing that that was the only difference for him to get out of the neighborhood was to have an education.
Whether it was on the basketball court or the court of law, Vincent Vinnie Cohen was all about breaking down barriers.
He grew up playing on the playgrounds of New York. The way you would get your creds, or the way you would get your respect, was to go travel through different playgrounds in the city. But you would have your set playground, and that would be where people would come and play you.
It was on those playgrounds that Vinnie Cohen refined his basketball skills. In 1952, he led his boys' high team to a New York City public school championship.
My understanding is he could jump out of the gym, so that he could jump higher than everybody. So if you're 6'1", 6'2", but you can leap, then I guess, you're at forward.
His extraordinary skills caught the eye of Syracuse University, who brought him to campus for a look.
I think they had him play either one-on-one with somebody or play in some game or something, and then they realized that he was, I guess, the real deal, so they gave him a scholarship.
Vinnie's recruitment in the 1950s was part of an initial wave of African-American basketball players integrating universities. It had been a long, slow process, but now blacks began trickling on to rosters, and they were finding big-time success, like the 1950 CCNY team, winning both the NIT and NCAA, with an integrated roster of black and Jewish players. And to make that NCAA championship even sweeter was defeating Adolph Rupp's segregated squad. Hello Elgin, hello Wilt, hello opportunity, and justice for all. And hello to high-flying Vinnie Cohen at Syracuse, where Manny Breland, a hometown sensation from Central Tech, was already on scholarship.
Oh yeah, Manny was good. He had a great two-handed set shot. That's what I remember about him. He was the last person that ever shot those long ones with two hands.
I played against Manny in high school, and he was difficult then, and he was tougher on opponents when he was at SU.
He was so good on fast breaks too, because he'd get down there and pass the ball around a couple times on a fast break, and he'd always get that layup and dunk it.
And oh yeah, there was another guy who also played a bit of football, Jimmy Brown.
He was a double-figure scorer, heck of a rebounder. How'd you like to go up and rebound against him?
If you can imagine 230 pounds rumbling toward the basket, not too many people got in front of him.
At the time, there was segregated housing. So the black athletes had to room together. So he was up there, as you know, during the same time as Jim Brown. So Jim Brown and him were roommates for the times that they were at Syracuse. He said he was a very good basketball player. He had great defense. Man, he was very fast, so he could steal the ball.
He'd get on a fast break and get someone close to him, and he'd dunk the ball.
From 1954 to 1957, Jim Ridlon played with Jim Brown in the same Syracuse backfield.
He was like a Marvel human being that was from another planet, transported here to show us how athletic one person could be. Vinnie was the most embraceable guy you've ever met in your life. As soon as you saw him, said 3 sentences to him, you loved him, you liked him, you wanted him as a friend. And he taught Jim some of those traits. They carried over. They spent a lot of time. They ate every meal together, just about. Another thing about Vinnie was he was an excellent student, and he helped Jim Brown. A lot of times they would get together at dinner time and go over Jim Brown's studies he needed for the next day. And I think more than any other person on campus, that includes teachers, coaches, anybody, Vinnie Cohen was his greatest asset.
Vinnie and his African-American teammates faced extreme challenges on and off the court.
There was gouging of the eyes. There was undercutting on the basketball court. There were subbing in of players that clearly wouldn't play just to take out Manny and take out my dad. That's what he said playing basketball against the majority players was like back then. So he encountered all of that.
Coach Mark Gooley's 56-57 squad seemed to have everything. Manny Breland was back after a year off due to a bout with tuberculosis. There was size with Jim Snyder, Gary Clark, and a promising newcomer, John Sensibo. And of course, there was the team's high-scoring leaper, Vinnie Cohen. But someone was missing from the picture. Jim Brown, upset over a cruel numbers game. An unspoken agreement that said you could only start 2 African Americans at a time.
Back then, that was not out of the ordinary to have those kind of, segregated rules or discriminatory rules. Manny Breland obviously started, and my father was the second African American to start. And then there were 3 non-African Americans who had to start. Jim Brown, who believed he was the 3rd best player on the team, regardless of color, would not start. So he actually quit the team. And he quit the team because he thought he should start.
He really believed in equality, and he gave up some of his career for that. I mean, he dedicated himself to be a legitimate protester for what was going on in the country.
When Big Jim left, Vinnie took his game to a whole new level. It was an All-American senior campaign, averaging 24.2 points a game, as he compiled 605 points for the season. And he wasn't alone. Down in the paint, the rugged forwards Clark and Snyder were putting up big numbers too, while young Sensibo was crashing the glass at a rapid rate.
Who averaged big-time double-figure rebounds. He was really, per game, as good a rebounder really as Syracuse ever had.
The guys scrapped their way to a 16-6 regular season. And for the first time in school history, a Syracuse basketball team made the NCAAs, defeating UConn and Lafayette before falling to the eventual national champion, North Carolina, in the Elite Eight.
The main story he talked about is how upset he was that he thought that they could have won if Jim had stayed on the team. They tried to talk him into staying on the team.
After graduating from Syracuse, Vinnie was drafted by the Syracuse Nationals, but also received an academic scholarship to Syracuse's law school.
And by that time, him and my mother were an item, and they were thinking about getting married. So he went to my mother and said, look, I'm kind of torn. Which one do I do? And they kind of realized that if he went to law school, did well in law school, he could probably make more of a living for them. You can imagine a guy from Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, basketball player, to forego his professional basketball to go to law school. It was a very mature and kind of weighty decision that he made.
Vinnie was the top of his law school class, and as he neared graduation, he was recruited by several Washington, D.C. law firms. But there were more barriers to breach.
That he would go down, he would be recruited and asked to come down to interview at the firms. And as you know, Vincent Cohen is not a traditional African-American name. So he would go down to interview, and he said he'd walk into the room and they would be astonished by who he was and what he looked like. Then they would say, well, we're sorry, we just don't hire Negroes. Our clients won't pay for their work. So there's a mistake, I'm sorry. And then he would just go back up to Syracuse. And he said that happened to him 3 times.
But Vinnie persisted.
And so he ended up getting a job at the EEOC, Department of Justice, Civil Rights. And that's where he started his career. He also was at Ohio Bell as well. He said those utilities and the government were the only two places hiring black lawyers at a law school.
Boxed out and well defended, but in the end, equality won in a blowout.
He was the first black partner of a major white law firm in Washington, D.C. Hogan and Hartson at the time is now Hogan Loveless.
Vinnie Cohen always maintained a close connection to Syracuse University. Not only did his son Vincent Jr. play basketball at the school, but with other Syracuse sports alumni, returned to campus, conducting roundtable discussions with the current athletes. Before the days of name, image, and likeness, his message was clear.
My dad's main point was, why would you play this game for free? Your payment is your education. Your payment is your academic scholarship. So don't come up here and just play basketball and leave without your degree. Your degree is how they pay you, and your payment is your education. So make sure you get that as well.
Vincent Vinnie Cohen passed away December 25th, 2011. Yet his legacy of learning continues at Syracuse University.
School was pounded in to our brains, and because of that, I have started 2 scholarships at Syracuse, one in my dad's name and one in my mother's name, earmarked for underserved people. And I did that because of the importance of education that my parents showed us. It's sad to think about all of the schoolyard players that were probably very, very good that never made it to college, never were able to get their degrees and go on to something like law instead of just playing basketball because of just latent discrimination. My dad used to tell me many, many times, the only difference between me and a lot of my friends that I grew up with on the block and in my neighborhood was I was able to get an education. That was the only difference. He said, I'm smart, but they were smart too.
Come on.